Human resources people, what's the stupidest thing you've seen an employee do? One of the security guys at my company was caught pleasure himself during the day at the main reception desk by a female PA. When we had his exit interview, we asked him why he did it, and he just said he felt really comfortable at work and got carried away while browsing Reddit. He'd been with the company for years. The best part was a colleague of mine who came back from vacation a week later and asked what happened to Ron. Someone said he was fired, and immediately the guy said, "Oh, what? Did he get caught pleasure himself?" But he didn't even know. He just got the vibe that Ron would do it at work. Story 2. One of my technicians used our remote software to start typing to a girl whose machine he took control of. He opened Notepad, wrote, "What up, escort?" and then went to adult sites. Supervisor gets an email about harassment the same day, and he's gone the next morning. Story 3. Oh, I am so excited to share. I had an employee go to Vegas for a long weekend. He had been late a few times before and had been warned that continued tardiness would result in disciplinary action. So, this Einstein is headed back from Vegas with his buddy after they both blew all their money and they realize that they don't have enough gas to make it back. He really doesn't want to be late. Already, you are probably thinking of the multitude of options available to these two fine, upstanding citizens. They could call saying they were in a jam, they could beg for $20 and see if anyone took pity on them, or they could steal some gas. They chose none of these options. The two of them decided the best option was to take a handgun from their trunk, go into a gas station, hold it up, and demand exactly $20. They then drove 1 mile down the road to the next gas station where they filled up, paid, and were surrounded by the police as they were attempting to pull back onto the road. When I first heard what happened, I was sure the story must be exaggerated or wrong. I knew the kid wasn't the sharpest knife in the drawer, but I never dreamed anyone could do something so amazingly idiotic. It still boggles my mind. Story 4. I once worked in a retail store where we all had our own access codes that allowed us to do stuff. And if our code didn't allow us to do it, we weren't supposed to be doing it. On his first day during training, he managed to catch the general manager's code as he was typing it in and used it for about a week. Pretty much gave away thousands of dollars of equipment in the manager's name. It was particularly stupid because he did it because he still had his trainee position, which required somebody to look over most of what he did, if he wanted to give discounts, etc. If he had waited another couple of days, he would have been moved up to full staff member and could have given out most of those discounts anyway, without anybody noticing or caring. He just couldn't wait to give his friends all the free swag. Story 5. Employee wrote a hole on the bottom of a customer's oil filter. Customer decided to change his oil one day. Something fired. At the time, employees were required to sign their initials for Upper Bay and Lower Bay with the date. The Upper Bay tech signed JJ and the Lower Bay tech was Oz. JJ was pissed at us that day and finished the Lower Bay's initials with Shoal beside it and handed it to him to install. Customer found it a month later doing his own oil change and brought the filter. Employee admitted it and was terminated from above. Still friends to this day, and he is now a teacher. Story 6. In high school, a guy I knew stole a giant Ronald McDonald made of Legos from the McDonald's he worked at. It was one of those guess the number of pieces contests. He got away with it, but later on he was busted for stealing boxes of hash brown wrappers with Monopoly game pieces on them. Cops show up at his place to arrest him over the hash browns. Lo and behold, there sits Ronald in the middle of his room. Story 7. A concessions attendant gave a substances brownie to my 75-year-old door person at my movie theater. She didn't press charges, but he had to go. No paperwork on it either. I had him resign. This story clearly struck a chord with a lot of people. I will try to answer as many questions as possible. She, the door person, didn't know what was wrong. A friend of hers visited that evening and figured it out. She told me the next day. I was off the day it happened. He, concessions, didn't deny anything. Actually thought what he did was 100% okay. Completely disconnected from what could have happened. Actually asked for his job back a few times. Years later, he apologized after going to rehab. I'm pretty sure the guy still smokes. Just a guess. I haven't spoken to either of them in ages. The theater was in Northern California. That's as close as I want to identify it. This was a long time ago, and we worked it out with every party's agreement. I'm happy, and I'm fairly certain that they are too. Story 8. I was the manager of a Papa John's, and a lady called and complained about a driver going too fast near her kids. Driver comes back, and I say, "Pat, a lady called. Try and slow it down a bit." He goes postal in front of a packed audience of pickup customers. "Duck you, man. Whose side you on?" "Not mad, Pat. Just be careful." "Nah, duck it. She's lying." "Pat, dude, not mad. Just be careful." "Ah, no, duck that. You and I need to go outside." "Calm down, dude. Not mad at you. Don't worry." "Duck, you. Flop, babble, mibble, babble. You're done, man. Go home." Most awkward pizza firing aside from when this dude tried to kill me when I worked on the coast. Pat's a nurse now. Story 9. I was an editor on my college's student daily newspaper. We had a photography staff that would photograph events, sports games, etc. But they'd also sometimes have to do stupid stock photo type things for feature or trend articles. Think like a photo of someone filling out a college application for a story on college admissions or something. Anyway, we had two photogs who were apparently in a group of friends that had formed some kind of snake cult. Probably had another name that they used, but we called it the snake cult when we found out about it. The way we found out about it was that we started noticing this weird symbol in the background of some of our feature article photographs. On a post-it note, in the background of a shot of some library books, or in the shape of the food in a photo of some dining hall food for an article about meal plan. Once we discovered it, we looked back and saw it had been going on for months. So yeah, we had to fire some photogs for slipping cult symbols into our student paper on a regular basis. Story 10. This actually just happened. Our supplier came out onto my construction site and cooked everyone a free Barbie. This one bloke had a meltdown and almost had a fight with the chef. Their conversation started off like this. Guy, where's the butter? Chef, ain't got no butter, mate. Guy, what kind of Barbie is this without any butter? Chef, a free one. If you don't like it, don't have it. Then the guy blew up yelling at the chef for making smart-arse comments and swearing his head off, while the chef thought nothing of it and remained really calm and telling the guy to take it easy. Our site does not tolerate this kind of behavior. Needless to say, we kicked the guy off-site ASAP. Lost a job over a free Barbie and butter. Turns out there was butter in the fridge. Story 11. I was the assistant manager at a store that had an actual time clock and a point system. For those of you that don't know, a point system is basically just a magnet for turnover. 1 minute late, and you get a point, the same as if you are 30 minutes late. Call in sick, you get 2 points. If I didn't log it at least 30 minutes prior to your shift. No call, no show, and you get 4 points. It took 8 points to get fired at this particular company, and the points were logged at headquarters, not at the facility. I had a single mother, dad bailed when she was pregnant, that worked for me, and she was the best damn employee any human could ask for. She worked hard, stayed late if it was needed, picked up extra shifts from coworkers that wanted off, and more importantly, she was damn good at her job. Well, her son got sick on her way to take him to the babysitter one day. He projectile vomited blood all over back seat. I saw the car and it looked like a scene from a horror movie. Needless to say, she didn't call in. She panicked and took him to the hospital. Boom, she had 4 points. Over the next 2 weeks, he was in the hospital and had random tests. So when those tests randomly popped up, she would call in to be with him, instead of having the grandmother watch him while she was at work. Twice those tests were announced while she was on her way to work, so she had to call in, and I understood why she did. I am a father. I didn't mind working the long shifts to cover her absence. No decent human would have. I received a call the day after her second call in, while the child was being tested, and corporate made my heart sink. I had to fire this woman, whose son was in the hospital, and I had to tell her that she was no longer employed. I spent over 5 hours arguing on her behalf to corporate, but it was to no avail. She came in the next day, I fired her like I was supposed to, and I immediately quit my job without notice. Story 12. We worked at a place that bought and used cell phones. She bought a cell phone from a guy and his Facebook was still open. She posted as the guy on his Facebook something like, "I'm a big ducking idiot." Guy came back to complain. She was fired. Story 13. I had to fire this kid from a gas station I worked at after he asked me if I ever poked holes in the condoms with a pushpin, as he proceeded to punch holes in condoms. I have no idea how long he was doing it for. He worked there for over a year. Story 14. Receptionist who forgot to wear pants. I was at a satellite office and had 4 employees call me separately to let me know. There were some previous issues, plus they were pretty sure she was on something. Story 15. One of my cooks asked for a smoke break, told him to go for it. He hadn't come back after 10 minutes, so I looked out the window. He was smoking. He came back in, started cooking some food, turned to me and said, "I don't feel so good. I think I need to go home." "Yeah, Reggie, maybe it's because you just smoked by the dumpster. Get the hell out." "Nah, man, I can still prep." I then spent 5 minutes explaining to him why I couldn't have a smoke using a giant cheese knife. To this day, I don't think he still understands why he was fired. We worked at this sort of pasta hybrid place that failed, and like many have pointed out, substances were used by the kitchen staff. My only rules were, don't do anything on the clock and don't do it in uniform. Reggie had screwed up a few times. I hated letting him go, because he actually was a good line cook. The guy found another cook job pretty quickly. Story 16. I was managing a restaurant and did morning cash out. I checked all slips against the information in the computer. I noticed a new hire had really good tip averages the day before when I had been paying her out. The next day I was going through her slips and noticed a discrepancy, mainly that she had added a 1 in front of each tip and changed the total. How could I tell, you ask? She used different color ink. She was fired and we refunded the money. Seriously, at least use the same color ink. Story 17. Worked at a nightclub. One of the workers called in sick, but he was actually going to some party instead. Could you guess where they went after the party? Yes, to our nightclub. Story 18. I had a manager steal a bag that a customer had left on the counter. He completely denied it too, and I believed him. But the customer was sure he left it there and asked to see the video. I hadn't seen anything odd, so I showed it to him. He pointed out the bag, which we watched until the manager of 10 plus years took the bag and left. Idiot. Story 19. Not showing up and not calling in. Everyone has a phone and can make up a crappy excuse. Call and let me know you are not going to show up so I can get someone else. Damn. Story 20. There was one time I had to fire someone because I sent him out on a job that would only take 2 to 3 hours to complete. Before he left, he mentioned to the receptionist that he was going to make it last all day. She mentioned it to me, and sure enough, he returned over 8 hours later. Being dishonest with a client's money is not something I was going to tolerate. Story 21. I told him to stop getting high before work. I even told him he was a good worker when not high, and that I didn't care what he did off the clock. I literally told him that people could smell substances on him, and that he acted like an idiot while high. He apologized, agreed with me, even offered up the fact that it was, in fact, affecting his work. Next day, shows up stoned to the bone. Sorry, guy, you're fired. Story 22. Personal hygiene. You'd think people would have the common courtesy to shower before working with others. That person smelled like pure bow with crap sprinkled on top. Story 23. Backstory. Employee Ed works a union job, works 40 hours per week, makes about $60K per year, full benefits, full pension, tons of paid vacation, and is in his early to mid-30s. Ed has absolutely no education, did not even finish high school, is socially awkward, pretty much sucks at his job, is physically weak, often injured, never enough for a doctor to find a problem, just enough to get alternate duty. Basically, the picture I'm painting is that Ed would be homeless if it wasn't for this job for life he somehow lucked into. He is completely unemployable otherwise. Mother ducking Ed takes funeral leave for a Thursday and a Friday for his mother's funeral. Some other manager, who seems to remember his mom dying a few years ago, does some snooping and eventually asks for some proof. Ed turns in a faked obituary, gets found out, and fired. I still think about that guy sometimes. He turned down the best gig of his life for a stupid 4-day weekend, when he had like 20 paid days off available for use anyway. People saying 20 days, that's nothing. Here in England, we get 2 years paid off every year. 1. I get it. Different countries are different. 2. I never said this happened on January 1st. Maybe he only had 20 days left after using 20 more. 3. I was actually referring to individual paid days off in addition to paid vacation, WHCIH. Comes in 5-day increments anyway. Story 24. I worked with a guy who got fired for buying adult film on eBay all day at work. I thought this was pretty out there until I saw the other adult film at Work Stories here. But still, I think this takes the cake because he was internet savvy and still paying for second adult film DVDs. That's varsity level work. Adult film. Stupid. Story 25. I used to manage a hotel. You would not believe the amount of female employees I had to constantly remind it was against company policy to have sex with the guests. One woman who I had to remind this of several times was caught mid-act having sex with a guy looked like Santa Claus. After she was fired, one of her coworkers told me that this woman had a Santa Claus fetish and thought she'd never get the opportunity to act on it, so it was worth possibly getting caught and fired. Girl was pretty decent looking too. Story 26. Worked at a fairly large used bookstore in NYC. We often listed and sold rare books online, and sometimes had really unusual items that were truly one of a kind, signed and numbered or personally inscribed from one famous person to another or whatever. One day, we get a phone call from one of the managers from the huge bookstore up the street, which also happens to be our biggest competitor. He explains that he has a large stack of merchandise that he is sure was stolen from our store. Apparently, earlier that day, a fellow had come to his store with some books and art prints he was hoping to sell. The manager looked a few of them up and quickly deduced that they were stolen. 2 of the items in particular were really exceptionally rare and obviously identifiable as belonging to us. This would have all been bad enough, but the manager had one last piece of information to share. Thing is, he says, I'm pretty sure that the guy who brought them in works for you. I've seen him over there a bunch of times. He usually works Sundays and Mondays, tall guy, blonde hair, wears cowboy shirts, blah, 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 and proceeds to absolutely and without a shadow of a doubt identify our sales associate, Dan. Dan had apparently gone into our rare book room, stolen the books, which were already listed for sale on the internet, walked an entire 4 blocks to one of the most famous bookstores in the city, and tried to sell his stolen loot to one of the booksellers he saw at least twice a week in our store. Unbelievable. If we hadn't fired him for theft, we would have had to fire him for the epic stupidity. Story 27. Damn it, it's my time to shine. I was working in Australia and hired an American from Oregon. Let's call him Mark. I too am American, important. It wasn't one simple act, but a collection of retardancy so grand, I don't know if I can really type this. First things first, Ugh, duck this guy. So I hired him because I needed someone pronto and the hiring had to be done now. He was ready to go and able to do this relatively simple lifting job. The next day, he got kicked out of the hostel he was in because someone stole his meat out of the fridge. He then asked me if he could stay with me till he found a new hostel. Whatever, sure. It's the dumbest thing I've ever done. Next day, I am sitting in my office, in my house, and I hear, duck, WTF. I walk into the kitchen, other side of the house, and he is in there trying to cut a ducking can of blackberries in half with a butter knife. No crap. Dude, what are you doing? Man, what the hell? How are you supposed to open these things? Bullcrap, man. With a can opener? What, you mean like one of those things you use to open a beer? And he makes the hand gesture. Yeah, sorta. It's brother really. Always on a pocket knife together. Different ends, though. What? Those are for beer? You're stupid. How would that even work? Beer bottles are screw off. Duck me. I walk off. 10 minutes later, I walk to the kitchen for water. Not really sure. Don't remember, but he is sitting on the couch, and it looks like he broke the can open with a rock, eating the blackberries with his hands, covered in crap, smiling from ear to ear. I assume because he foiled natural selection yet again. 2 days later. At this point, he has proven to be a horrible, horrible employee. But at home, mind-ducking blowing. Sitting in my office, he just walks in and asks for a pair of socks. Duck that and duck you. I will let you borrow anything of mine except my underwear and socks. Nope. His are dirty, and he doesn't want to do a load. I tell him no, and he complains a bit, but walks off. A few minutes later, he is back and is asking for a pair of scissors. Whatevs. Top drawer, I say. He grabs them, says thanks, and walks off. He walks back into my office, but just stands behind me, not saying anything. I ignore him for a solid minute. I can feel the energy building. Finally, I slump my shoulders and push off from my desk and turn around. This dumb mother ducker is so proud of himself. He holds up 2 socks. What? What is that? Dude, I made new socks. Huh? I took one of my old socks, cut it in half, now I have a new pair. It suddenly clicks. I hired a spastic. Dude, what the duck are you talking about? You cut a sock in half, now you just ruined a dirty sock. Back of my brain, holy crap, new socks, each shows clean socks. One sock covered his toes but not his heel, and one hanon covered his foot but not his toes nor his heel. He wore those things for 3 days to prove a point. I fired him when I caught him bragging to a customer about hourly pay. But let's be honest here, it was the socks and blackberries that did it, among other things. He didn't move out for another 3 days. Story 28. A PC technician was being pestered with questions from a customer about sales stuff. He lost it, and while looking the customer square in the face, the employee had his eyes closed, however, said, "Get away from me or I'll eat your face." It took half the day to get over the laughter and WTF of the situation before we could even begin on paperwork. Story 29. A dumb guy at work. Call him Julio. We worked clothing retail together. One night, closing shift, we are folding tons of clothing, working our way from the outer tables inwards, laughing and joking as we went. Julio is a fun guy to be around. Sometimes he'll moonwalk, dance, sing, general clownery to make the shift enjoyable. So that fateful night, we're almost done. About 8 of us are working on the last 2 tables of clothing. Julio does his funny dance from there to there and ends up grinding with a coworker. She dances along and he poked her. She noticed and angrily jumps away. Needless to say, Julio and Julio Jr. were fired for harassment. The assumption that the girl he grounded against is the one who complained. I don't know who did. He had a history of behavior like that. He was an outgoing guy who got away with lots of stuff. Always joked and played around. I guess someone finally got sick of his crap. After he was let go, I heard of other girls and customers express, to varying degrees, a sense of satisfaction. He'd been doing that for a while, I guess. Story 30. In the interview, he was told he would have to take a substances test if he was hired. He was hired. He failed the drug test. When I brought him in and told him that he failed, he said, "Yeah, I knew I would." Then why? I'm sure it's not unusual, but still, why bother? He quit another job to take one that he knew he would lose immediately. Why? The other job, by the way, was janitor in a high school, which I assume he went back to. Story 31. Worked at KFC. Guy got fired for doing CK at work in the office, where there are cameras. In hindsight, probably should have seen it coming. He showed up to the interview with shirt with the Wheel of Fortune board on it. Said, "Get duck yourself." And underneath that, "Would you like to buy a vowel?" Guess that was his nicest shirt. Also, I once saw him eat ice out of a bucket that had raw standing chicken water. Kind of speaks volumes of KFC that he even got hired. Story 32. Not a boss, but HR. Had a guy on a temporary work comp, transitional assignment at a retail store. His regular job had very good pay, a lot of benefits, etc. The git stole a used scuba suit from his temporary job site, on camera. We're well over 1,000 miles from any ocean. Story 33. I got a great one. My friend and I were both district managers for a vendor company that worked in Home Depot's building displays and merchandising. One day, one of the workers was on the store phone talking with one of the owners of the company. Owner hears in the background an in-store page for a manager he knows had been fired a month before. It turns out this guy had made an hour-long recording of the inside sounds of a Home Depot and would play it on his stereo anytime someone would call him. Fooled everyone for months. My buddy and me drove to his house and parked outside and called him. My friend asked him where he was, and he goes, "I'm at the store." We tell him, "You myth want to look out your window." We see his curtain part a little bit and close fast. We told him, "Don't bother coming out, you're fired." Gotta give him credit for the balls and ingenuity though. Story 34. I'm not a boss, but a guy at my former job got fired because he broke a light fixture when he was ducking around with a mop. The manager on duty, who admittedly was a little insane, whipped his head around and in the most terrifying voice said, "Sweep that up, then get the duck out." Story 35. Had an employee call in sick a few busy retail Saturdays in a row. The pattern got me a bit suspicious, but I had no proof until a coworker who wasn't all too happy working up front shorthanded again came into my office cell phone in hand to show me selfie photos that the sick employee had just posted to Facebook of her sunbathing. Story 36. This guy always tried to hide at work to avoid working. One day I was looking for him and I stepped into the bathroom. I notice a shoe print on the back of the toilet and I look up and one of the ceiling tiles is pushed a little to the side. I climb up there and this mother ducker is hiding in the ceiling. Story 37. Wasn't the boss. Sorry, but a coworker at the gas station job I had in high school got fired for just pulling scratch-off lottery tickets off the roll and scratching them off right on the counter, directly in front of the security cameras we all knew about. Story 38. Parking in the fenced-in lot, chain link fence. Along the street, he was smoking weed in his car and having sex with his girlfriend, and the cops decided to investigate since they knew it was after hours and should be empty. He could have driven 20 feet more and been behind a building. Story 39. At my old job, my boss was very trusting, one of the give everyone a second chance types. Usually it worked out and he got hard-working people helping him. He would trust us with things like using the company gas card to fill up the department truck, working late on our own with nobody else in the building, helping ourselves to snacks from the stockroom, etc. My last year there, when he knew I was planning on moving on to a new job, he hired on a new guy, let's call him Git, who we all saw right away wasn't the brightest bulb. He would do things like try the starter on a lawnmower while someone was under it checking the blade. Still, despite all this, he was a hard worker and would do the labor-intensive jobs that nobody else really wanted. And the boss would occasionally loan him money as an advance on his paycheck when he needed gas money. Years later, I happened to run into an old coworker and chatted him up. Asked how things were back at the company. He said Git had just gotten fired. I asked why, and it turns out that Git had been stealing the company gas card and filling up his Pinto with it. Yes, a Pinto. He'd sneak into the boss's office after Bossman had left for the day, get the gas card from his desk, and once everyone else was gone, he'd run down the street and fill up his car, then return the card like nothing happened. Well, he got busted when the boss saw a ton of late-night charges on the card and the mileage on the truck just didn't add up to all the gas usage, compared the shift times to when the charges were and figured out quickly who was stealing the card at night. Things only got worse when he found out that all the cash he had loaned to Git for gas money was instead being used to buy crack for him and his girlfriend. I wish I could say I was surprised when I heard all this. I was not. Story 40. This guy thought it was a good idea to weld a big open-top container of petrochemical solids, oily dirt, and it caught my container and my excavator on fire. Story 41. I was working as an assistant manager of a small local restaurant chain. We hired a new waitress. She had lots of experience and was really personable. I liked her. She began her first shift and things were going smoothly. She's tending to her tables and the guests are all happy. She required very little training as she was pretty much autonomous. Partway into her shift, she began to become uneasy and nervous. She approached the general manager and asks if she can run home quickly. He tells her, no. She seems slightly upset but continues with her tables anyway. About an hour later, something is more visibly wrong. I decided to approach her. Since I'm a girl, I figured whatever issue she was having might be easier to say to me instead of our male GM. She begins to tell me that she got her period at the start of her shift and had no tampons or pads with her. I felt awful for her, but I had none of my own to give to her. I asked the GM if she could leave for 5 minutes to go across the street to the convenience store to get some pads. His remarks were basically, she just needs to deal with it and continue her shift. He had many laughs at her expense throughout the night, telling the other employees about what a baby she was and that she's whining. I'm not certain, but I'm sure it's a definite health risk to have a bleeding waitress tending tables and touching food. I had issue with this, but I didn't have authority over him. I asked if I could leave to get her some, to which he again refused. This poor girl starts crying. She tells him that she really needs to leave, but she wants to come back to finish her shift. He had a lot of fun mocking her saturated plea. Finally, after hours of this poor waitress, he decides to let her leave. It was closing time by that point. He made me call her the next day to tell her that we won't be keeping her as a server. I hated it. I quit shortly after. They treated their employees like crap, and I'm so glad I got out of there. Story 42. Had an employee show every other employee and every customer, his really big pocket knife. He always follows his big reveal with a smug, largest one allowed by law. After being repeatedly told to knock it off, we worked at help desk for crying out loud. I had to can him. Story 43. As a recruiter, I've had to pull people off assignments for watching adult film on their work computer on day one of the job. He left it up, the Git. It came by while he was on his lunch break to install some software, and lo and behold, adult film. The dude was married to a woman. Also had to pull a woman off an assignment when she spent a week getting hammered on vodka and drunk, dialing her on-site supervisor. ETA. The first thing the managers did was investigate to make sure he wasn't the victim of a crappy prank. Even if they didn't check, my hands were tied. If the company where I place someone tells me to get them someone else, my personal opinion of it doesn't matter. I'm also fully aware that bisexuality is a thing, and it doesn't matter to me how someone gets their jollies as long as it's legal. I specified the type of thing he was watching because details are what make a story. And in those cases, I still would have specified the married part because it illustrates that he's not a get-young single guy. He's a man with a family to provide for and therefore a lot to lose by being around on the job. It also illustrates why he was watching adult film at work, since he has a lack of privacy at home. Story 44. Guy told everyone on the break room how the boss's daughter wanted his junk, and the next day came to work and overdosed. I'm the daughter and didn't want his junk. Story 45. Not the boss, but a former employee. I worked at a dock construction company working the Potomac. Before I get into this, I'd like to add almost everyone but myself was an ex-con, regularly smoked spice or weed on the job, and didn't have a driver's license. So anyways, we're on a barge, working on someone new dock. We have to break out the chainsaw to cut a piling to size once it's in. Boss was a cheapskate, rented a really crappy chainsaw. Coworker can't get it to start, loses his crap, and throws the rented chainsaw into the river. He then proceeds to push an excavator attachment that vibrates the pilings into the mud, off the boat into 20-foot deep water. This thing is worth, I don't even know how many thousand. It's gone, sunk to the bottom. He's technically the most senior staff at the job site, so he has all the keys. He hops into the base boat we were pulling the barge in, disconnects it, gets 1,000 or so feet down shore towards his car and slams the boat into riprap. Then he gets in his car and leaves. All the while, he's screaming, cursing, raging, and even crying. All of that because the chainsaw wouldn't start. Granted, it was the worst, shadiest company I've ever worked for, and that day was an exceptionally horrid day, but goddamn. Needless to say, he was very fired. I believe my boss actually threatened to, and then tried, to find and lost him. Story 46. My previous employer didn't exactly fire me, but did put me on a permanent, unpaid, forced medical leave until my migraines were resolved. I should note that I had not missed a single day due to migraines. I sued and they settled. Story 47, 2 different tellers. One was my ATM teller. She stole the cash from the same guy twice, who worked across the street. Didn't take long to figure out. Second was my vault teller. Stole $3K on her day off, was a yearly branch-wide surprise audit. She assumed she was done with audits for the quarter. The vault, obviously, was short. I don't know why these two thought they could get away with essentially robbing a bank. Story 48. Had to fire a brand new employee. Second day on the job for backing out the maintenance truck. He neglected to close the wide open passenger door and it got caught on the concrete security pillars. Bent back the door past 90 degrees out. Then the Git attempted to drive forward as if nothing happened, like he bumped into a curb. Several of our employees had to flag him down halfway down the parking lot because he wouldn't stop. "Oh, my bad," was all he said. We started mandatory substances tests for all new employees after that. Story 49. I used to be a recruiter, so there are a lot of great stories, but this is my favorite. I didn't have to physically take this person off the job, but I was involved secondhand. I got a call from a temp employee working in the cafeteria of a large call center in town. She was yelling that people were after her, that her boss was hitting her in the back of the head. For a moment, I was concerned and thought I should call the police, but as she continued to go on and on, I realized she was just crazy. The company she worked within is a Fortune 500 company, and we'd worked with her supervisor for years. He was not hitting her in the back of the head. We sent one of the other recruiters down there to figure out what was going on and to pull her off the job. I spoke to her supervisor, and he said she just went nuts and was accusing everyone of hitting her in the back of the head. No one had touched her or really gone near her. The supervisor and security wanted her gone because she kept screaming and running around, but she wouldn't leave. So I wasn't there, but I know how it went down. The other recruiter arrived. She screamed, "Oh, Mr. Richard, they hitting me in the back of my head," and wept openly onto him. When he made it apparent she was fired, she ran away crying and everyone chased her. She ended up on the floor crying, and they all had to pick her up and call her emergency contact to come get her. It was her first day. We reviewed the security tapes and no one hit her in her head. Her sister said she would sometimes have outbursts where she felt like the devil was possessing her, but she apparently got over them quickly. She reapplied a few months later and was turned down for past terminations, but she looked great. Story 50. One of the girls who worked for me when I managed a blimpiest came in, clocked in, and told me it was her last day. I was not too sad to see her go, but I knew I'd have to cover all her shifts and train a new person. You may say to yourself now, Kern, we asked about firing, not quitting. Yeah, she not only refused to work her last shift, she refused to pretend to work. She stood in the way in the narrow lane I walk up and down to make sandwiches. This was 1998, so she did not have a cell, so she either kept making calls on the business phone or fax, or waiting for calls. I told her if she wasn't going to work, she should just leave. So she made more phone calls looking for a ride, and then continued to stand in the work area in uniform, staring at customers but not helping them. I told her to go wait in a booth for her ride, and she said something rude. She continued to be hostile and scare away customers, so I told her she had to leave now, or I would call the cops and tell them she was trespassing. That got her off the property. Then I went back to the office and erased her punch-in for the day. Felt good, man. That is the one time I fired someone. I may have been responsible or witnessed others, but that is the one I did. Story 51. I'm pretty late to this, but whatever. I ran a production team a few years back, making virtual tours for hotels and whatnot. Our guy was chronically late, full of excuses, and always showy, always sleeping on the job. He spent his time at home playing FPS games all night and bragging about it at work. He was almost totally useless, but he was one who wrote the code that powered the 360 photo tours. So as bad as he was, we were stuck with him, and he knew it. For months, I tried to convince the CEO to let him go. He wouldn't do it, mostly because they were old friends. The CEO, who worked out of a branch in another city, was convinced that it would take more money and time to train a new coder than we were losing just keeping him. So the ET guy stayed. One Monday, after he walked in an hour late, he pulled his chair to his desk, put his head down, and started snoring. It was so blatant. Something snapped, and after a few minutes, I threw a pencil at him. I walked out of the office and called the CEO on the phone. I said something like, "This is too much. My performance is evaluated by the production of my team, and my team is useless as long as he is here." The CEO relented slightly, so he told me, "Fine, take him aside and let him know that if he's late again tomorrow, he's fired." It was clear that the CEO was just placating me, hoping that coming to work on time for one day would be an easy enough chore for the guy that it would all work out. I took him into the conference room and told him, "Listen, you aren't working. If you are late again tomorrow, I will have to fire you." Soon after our meeting, he got a call from the CEO who basically told him, "Hey man, make sure to come into work on time tomorrow." I was completely ready to fire him if he was even 1 minute late. I always got to work at 7 o'clock, and the rest of the office, including the IT guy, started at 8. So I waited and waited and waited. The dude showed up at 9:45. He walked to his desk like nothing was wrong, pulled his chair to his desk, put his head down, and started snoring. It has never felt so good to fire someone. Story 52. Had an interview with a prospective aircraft mechanic who referred to himself as Jazz. Since we were short-handed, we decided to give him a chance. First day, I put him on rebuilding some brake calipers, standard noob mechanic job, and the brake table is right in front of the boss's window to the hangar. This kid lights up a cigarette and sits there like nothing is wrong, except, the huge no smoking sign sitting right above his head. Well, I get a page over the PA from the boss to come into the office. As I walk in, I see Jazz smoking and tell him rather clearly that there is no smoking in the hangar. He says, "Yeah, okay," and throws the butt on the ground and stomps it out. I walk past him to the boss' office, and she tells me that he has been standing there for 10 minutes doing nothing but smoking. So I go out and tell him I need 2 sets of calipers done for an aircraft that's taking off in an hour. He says, "Yeah, I think I'm going to take lunch first," and walks into the office, clocks out, lights up a cigarette, and walks into the boss' office and asks when payday is. She gives me the fire his ass look, and I ask him to step outside. I tell him that he's done and didn't make the cut. "Now you can leave. Goodbye. Don't come back." His first reaction? Take a swing at me. He misses by a long shot and hits the reinforced glass on the front door. He broke a few bones and threatened to sue us underground for everything we never owned, then proceeded to call us every day for almost a month to ask when he should come back in. Story 53. I had to fire someone for stealing someone's lunch from the break room. It was a security firm, and he was a security tech. Everything was under camera except the bathroom. I fired him because he should have known that, not because he stole someone's lunch. Story 54. I was a district manager for a specialty retailer. I received a call from the loss prevention manager that one of my stores had a couple of outstanding deposits, not a huge deal, but something to be addressed. I called the store to ask how many deposits they had in their safe, and per my conversation with the store manager, all the money was accounted for. He just had not made it to the bank yet. I decided to stop by his store to confirm the deposits were present and do him a favor by running them to the bank since he was so busy. I get to the store. It's not terribly busy, so I have him go to the back to get the deposits. When the safe opens, the money isn't there. What should have been several $1,000s in cash was maybe 100 or so in small bills and coin. I keep my cool, tell him we can sort it out, but I have to call the loss prevention manager to let him know what's up. The loss prevention manager comes to the store. By now, another employee has come in, so the three of us, me, the LPM, and SME, go to the back to have a meeting. We start talking, and the SAM breaks down and admits he has been floating deposits for weeks now. He just couldn't make ends meet, etc. Then it takes a turn for the worst because he starts only talking to the LPM in Spanish, which I do not speak. Guy explains that he's actually an illegal immigrant, used a fake stolen identity when he took the job. I did not hire him. He was in place when I took over the district. And yes, had stolen thousands in cash and merchandise. The LPM takes me outside, explains the situation, and says we're going to play it off like we can work it all out if we can get a signed confession from him. The SM writes the confession. Once we have it, the police were called. The SM was taken out in handcuffs. After the guy is cuffed, I have to let him know he's also officially terminated. It was a bad day for all involved. Story 55. A couple of coworkers decided to start dealing substances at the hospital we worked at and thought using the internal email system was a good way to keep in touch with customers. Story 56. As a IT admin since the dark modem ages, I have seen it all. But one story stands out. The guy with a fishing addiction. That's quite common in Norway. It's an outright hell to arrange project meeting because of salmon fishing, deer fishing, moose fishing. Wait a moment, I think you shoot some of those things. Anyway, we lost everything that swims, walk, or fly, and we have to be away from the office to do it. But this guy was seriously into fishing and fly binding. So he searches and clicks on everything related to nymphets at work. Yep, where they're trying to post disguise as art, models, gymnast, and so on. After cleaning his computer for pictures several times, he had to go. Story 57. Ran a haunted house last year. I ran an outdoor corn type of haunted house. The break room was in the center of the entire haunted corn maze. In the break room were 2 picnic tables, a water cooler, and plastic cups. One night, halfway through October, I walked into the break area to see one of my monsters lighting his plastic cup on fire. Kid didn't realize why he was being fired so quickly. Story 58. I had an employee who was getting drunk on the job. I found him in a hallway, on the floor, wasted. He told me that he got bad headaches and the only cure was champagne on crushed ice. Story 59. I was a retail manager for a long time. The weirdest experience I ever had firing someone was when we had to terminate a guy who didn't even work for us. This guy put his application in, had an interview, and we decided not to hire him because it was a customer service position, and he didn't speak English or Spanish. The interview ends and he leaves. Our standard procedure was to simply not call people back to let them know they didn't get it. No email was sent or anything. Somehow the guy got the idea that he was hired for an overnight position instead. We were expecting an associate transfer from another store in a few weeks, and the overnight manager assumed this was him when the unhired guy showed up to work. A lot of times, transferred employees would take some time to show up in the system for scheduling and things like that. They just do manual timesheets until it is fixed. So I'm closing one night and I am bullcrafting with one of the managers a lot longer than I normally do, and I see the unhired guy. I was like, what the hell is he doing here? And the overnight manager says, oh, that's our new transfer from the other store. Doesn't talk much, but he is an okay worker. So he had been working for like 3 weeks before I noticed basically creating a HR cluster duck. The solution was pay him out based on the hours he worked and have him sign some paperwork. Our home office's legal department had to write up just for this particular incident. Story 60. My mom once had to fire this one guy. He kept making dirty comments about a coworker. He was given warnings, so he switched to doing it in Spanish. The girl was from Mexico. She spoke Spanish. He got fired. Story 61. One of my safety and security officers had an accident at work. He somehow got his hand between a door and its frame. A week later, I got a call from insurance asking for video evidence. So I glance over it and what do I see? The guy is walking up to the heaviest door, opening it, putting his hand on the frame, and smashing it shut. He then inspects his hand, obviously in a lot of pain, and then does it again. I called him into my office and asked him about the accident. He told me the story of the door just flying shut and that he had no chance because it was so unexpected. I then watched the video with him. When he realized what was going on, he started to say that it is not him, even though he was on camera. I asked him to resign and he did, pointing out once again that this is not him. I later met his wife when she came over to threaten with legal action. Firing someone because of an accident is a criminal offense, she said, swearing at me. He had to be there too, and I realized that he married a dragon that was controlling his every step. He probably injured himself to have some free time while she is at work. I told her that we are a crafty company and do not care, which is also true. Of course, they never press charges. Story 62. Bar manager here had to sack another bartender for showing up morbidly drunk. I mean, abso-ducking-lutely crap-faced, cross-eyed duckard. I'm not a totally cold-hearted git. Strange crap happens in this line of work. But the icing on the cake was when he pulled out his junk and started waving it at the regulars at the bar. I tried to stop him, and he took a swing at me, missed, and fell over, passed out. I spoke to him a couple days later. He didn't remember a thing. It's become great barroom lore at work. Remember the time Jimmy pulled out his junk? You should have seen the look on your face. Story 63. Had an employee get caught rolling 20 blunts in the produce cooler he did offer to share. Another incident, all of lobsters kept dying off several times. Several thousands of dollars worth of lobsters, even after cleaning the tank a couple of times, in case there were some lobster-hating germs in there. Turns out, one of the overnight floor cleaners was staging gladiatorial lobster battles. Unfortunately, he forgot to wash his hands that were covered in floor-cleaning chemicals. Did not bode well for Spartacus and his armored brethren. Story 64. I say stupid because stuff like this should never happen in the workplace. We had to let two older women, approximately mid-50s, early 60s, go because they kept harassing this one poor woman who was younger than them. The girl was not the best worker, but she was very nice and tried very hard. But these two older women would do things like dump soda on her chair, pull keys off her keyboard so she couldn't get work done on time, etc. One time the girl's computer wouldn't work, so I popped the tower open and the power cables to the hard drive were cut. Now this was a small consulting company with only 10 employees, so it was pretty easy to suspect either one or both of them, but there were no cameras. My boss didn't want to spend the money for cameras, so I brought an IP camera I had from home and set it up hiding behind a plant. Real covert ops crap. Sure enough, before long I saw them over at her soda dumping something into it. We suspected toner. These ladies should have been brought up on criminal charges, I think. I mean, who knows what else they did to her. The girl ended up passing away from liver failure about a year later. She was very nice. To this day, I hope those two old bats are struggling financially from their nonsense. Why would anyone act like that? Story 65. I'm a manager for a well-known pizza chain. We use GPS tracking to keep track of our delivery folks, mostly just in case a customer calls in and asks, "Where's my pizza?" Delivery guy takes a couple of orders out to drop off in the same area. Customers call in, "Hey, we ordered over an hour ago. Where's the pizza?" I check the GPS system. Delivery looks like it's 1 or 2 blocks away, depending on who he drops off first. I say, "Looks like within minutes. I'm sorry for the wait. Would you like me to email you some discount codes for the wait? Blah, blah, blah." 15 minutes pass. Calls again. "Hey, still no pizza. I want a refund." I say, "Sorry, sir." "Certainly, and I will still send you some coupons." Check the GPS system. Car still in the same spot. Drive out to check on driver. 1, he is asleep in the car, seat cranked back. 2, has a cord and adapter plugged into his cigarette lighter. 3, it's connected to an old-ass electrical blanket that is wrapped around the pizzas inside the thermal delivery bag. Dude, it's ducking pizza delivery. Drive, drop off the pizza while it's hot. Make sure the order is right. Done. Ductard. Fired. Story 66. I own a catering company. 2 quick stories. One time I asked one of my employees to fill a cooler with bottles of water and ice. When I came to check on her an hour later, she had filled the cooler with ice and had opened every individual water bottle and dumped it into the cooler. She also didn't understand why that was wrong. A few weeks later, I gave the same lady the task of melting some butter for a clam bake. She put about 25 pounds of butter in a double boiler pot and turned on the burner. She decided it would be a good idea to walk away from the pot of melted butter to go have a cigarette. When she came back, the butter was burnt and boiling. In a panic, this woman decided to take a bucket of ice and dump it into the pot so the butter wouldn't be burnt anymore. The ice mixed with the boiling butter caused the molten butter to basically explode and cover the entire kitchen. Everyone was standing there in disbelief that she had sprayed hot butter over everyone. She also had the audacity to tell me that it was my fault that I didn't tell her not to put ice in molten burnt butter. Now that I think about it, I don't know why I hired her in the first place. Story 67. Guy who worked in the mailroom figured he could score a new laptop by ordering one in the CEO's name and forging a purchase order. Someone busted him before the laptop even arrived. Story 68. Fired someone for lying about time theft. He would swipe out after a few hours of nap time in the staff room, and the lone payroll guy, who was responsible for 800 employees, would just okay it. We caught him and confronted him about it. The union backed him, of course, and all he had to do to wipe the slate clean of thousands of dollars of time theft was to admit it. He said he was innocent. We submitted our video evidence, and he was fired. He spent 6 months disputing the firing. The entire time, he expected a huge payout. He was told to find a new job by his own union because his fate was as good as sealed, but he's a lazy crap and he refused. He expected to win his grievance and to be back paid. When we were done arguing our case, we ended up paying out $500. He expected $21,000. His face was priceless. Even though I felt good because I was sick of this cancerous hole influencing my staff, it eats me up that he just had a kid a year before. His wife is from out of country and can't legally work here, and now the best he can do is $4 less an hour for the same job. He has to find this job without a reference from the last 8 years. Then I remember that he had every chance in the world to rectify the situation, and he could have avoided the entire situation by working the hours he claimed to work. Story 69. I worked in a fast food kiosk in an amusement park. We had a machine that cooked our burgers and toasted our buns, one of those ones where the food goes through on a conveyor belt. One day, it was raining. While walking to the kiosk, a girl got wet. So, logically, she took her clothes off and put them through the machine so the heat could dry them. Her shirt caught on fire and set the kitchen sprinklers off. Her shoe forced the 2 toasting plates in the bun section far apart, creating a large repair bill. Story 70. This is more sad than stupid, but he should have known. One of my programmers was working at a customer, and during his lunch break decided to visit a website of a friend. The website had the option to leave a message. Smart programmer as he was, he left a message that was actually some code and would pop up a new window with a hello message. Technically, this is hacking a website. The internet provider of the website caught the hack and determined what IP address this came from. They then called that company, my customer, and threatened to shut down their internet. All alarm bells went off, and this was escalated to the CIO. This was a big company. And within a few minutes, they found out what workstation was used and who was using it. I was called and threatened to do something about it, or we would lose the contract. This was a 7-figure contract. I had to inform corporate, tried to explain what happened, but the only action acceptable was to fire the idiot. So before he could finish his lunch, my programmer was fired for pulling a prank on his friend's website. It was a very good programmer. So the next day I made some phone calls, and within a week he had a new job. But he learned his lesson, story 71. Had to fire a guy because he was breaking into rural farm homes and stealing prescription medication. He would knock on the door, and if someone answered, he'd ask if they were selling farm equipment, then leave. If nobody answered, he took it as an invitation. During one heist, some personal information fell out of his truck, and the cops ended up calling us. He's currently serving 10 years in jail. Story 72. Worked in big box electronics store and once fired a guy for breaking a pen. He started to get an attitude that was not pleasurable for anyone. He would constantly swear in front of leadership, call in sick when he was to hang over, and would draw junks all over my whiteboard I used for communication to my other staff. Was out of camera view, so I couldn't prove it was him. So I got told by pure management that I needed to find a reason to either make him quit or make a paper trail for him to get fired. So I came in for my regular shift on a truck night and did my usual routine of greeting all my staff to make sure they were all set for the night and didn't need anything from me when I decided to check on the train wreck of an employee and found that he had destroyed about 3 pens and had all the pieces scattered all over my desk. Walked in the general manager's room, handed in a write-up for termination with cause, destruction of company property, and shook the little git's hand on the way out in story 73. I had a worker tell a customer that they couldn't buy something because it was haunted. I had to give her credit for the try, so I put in the paperwork to get her pay for the rest of the day. Story 74. My favorite event happened right after Christmas in 2012. The grooming salon needed some extra help washing dogs, so I hired a sweet young red-headed girl we will call Lizzie. Now the head groomer and her assistant were a pair of mean freaking biznatches and decided they didn't like Lizzie, so they came up with a plan to make Lizzie leave. Lizzie has just gotten a nice new purse for Xmas, so the head groomer and her assistant decided, hey, let's ruin Lizzie's purse. When Lizzie found what they did, she came running to me crying with the most awful-smelling purse in the world. Thankfully, the groomer biznatches weren't too smart and did it in front of a camera. Lizzie and I both sat horrified as we watched it. When I was firing the 2 girls, they told me the whole process. They decided to collect dog feces and old rotten Chinese food, mix it all in a baggie and let it ferment for a week, then poured it in the poor girl's new bag. Both of these women were in their early 30s with children. Sigh, story 75. I was put in as manager for a week while the real boss was out for business. Within the first hour of being put in charge, the first real day, this is a kitchen, mind you, one of my coworkers decided to pleasure himself in the walk-in fridge. Really? Who the duck does that? Story 76. My dad worked in a food manufacturing factory, one of the biggest companies in the world. For 30 years, the engineers were allowed to bring in things from home to fix or work on in the workshops when they weren't doing official work. In the 90s, my dad built a Tracy Island from Thunderbird's toy for me and my brother. But in the last 5 years, they decided out of the blue to ban this, and they were really strict about it. So strict that when a worker brought in a lawnmower to fix, the crap hit the fan. The guy fixing the lawnmower was suspended and subsequently fired after a lengthy review. The guy that went out to his car to help him bring it in was suspended for 3 months. And the 2 people that held doors open for them were suspended for a month. These are all guys in their 40s and 50s that had worked there for decades. And this retarded situation cost them all their careers. Story 77. At Fuddruckers, we serve hand-dipped Bluebell shakes on malts with whipped cream on top. For months, our food distributor was sending us dud cases of whipped cream that was shooting out like heavy whipping cream. I called the other Fuddruckers in the area, and all of their whipped cream cans were working fine. I called the distributor manufacturer to ask questions and see if there was a problem. Nope. Well, apparently, I'm the only one in the world who didn't try Whippets as a kid and therefore didn't know I had a druggy cook sucking all nitrous oxide out of the cans. I wish we had cameras to see my face when I caught him red-handed with a can of whipped cream in his mouth. I just thought the guy loved whipped cream. Story 78. This story is legend in my hometown. There was a strange dude named Murray, a local kid that had something wrong with his thought spot. Never fired on all cylinders. Murray got a job at a pizza place as a pizza maker, which was a good job for him, stays in the back and doesn't face the public. All was well until a driver called in sick. Murray decides it's his night to shine and offers up his services as a delivery driver. Unbeknownst to the company, Murray didn't have a driver's license. That didn't stop him. This was his big night. Murray got pulled over beside the elementary school. Well, that won't stop him either. Murray grabs the pizzas and makes a run for it through the soccer field. It's around midnight and dark out. Murray turned to see if the police were chasing him and proceeded to run into a large white metal pole that I call a soccer net. Pizza went flying. Murray got arrested and fired. Story 79. Years ago, we had a guy get caught selling adult film off a website hosted from his government computer. This was back in the days when the network security was extremely lax. The only reason this guy got caught was because he took his computer into it and asked them to clean it up because it was running slow. We've also had guys get caught for stealing controlled items and selling them on the local Craigslist without even bothering to remove any of the identifying marks. Story 80. It's relevant, so I thought I'd share. At the time, I headed up a web development team of 7, and one guy was always a bit creepy, but quite a nice guy. We used IRC a lot to discuss web development problems in the Freenode community and to progress development. But I have to admit, this guy seemed to be on there quite a bit more than everyone else. One day, walking past him at his desk, I noticed the old quick minimize going on as he turned his chat window down, which immediately caught my attention. So after that, I logging on his Mirk and waiting a few days. Turns out he wasn't really working on web dev bits on IRC, but having really explicit cyber sex with a girl online. That was not an easy conversation to keep a straight face for. Story 81. I had to fire a cleaning machine operator for being accused by 4 security guards of a hospital for having sex in a storage room with one of the housekeepers. He was rare fit and handsome. She was about twice his weight. Both denied it, and I was certain it was false, but by hospital policy had no choice. Months later, one of the guards admitted they had framed him because they didn't like him. So I made such a fuss, they had to fire the guard that planned the frame, and the housekeeper was fired too, inexplicably. I hired her later for a other customer, and I asked the first guy to come back, but he refused. It's one of the things I regret in my career. Story 82. Fired a guy because he couldn't work a pallet jack. Got it in a corner and couldn't get it out. Oh, and it was empty. Fired a guy because he came in late. Again. His excuse, I fell asleep while putting on socks. Even if that happened, you should lie about it. Story 83. I have a job which requires me to use translators and interpreters. I was in one country, one of the stands, and my interpreter was a young guy in his mid-20s. He would come in late to the office and would start nodding off by mid-morning. He would not both to translate and docs, which I asked for. This was all within the first week. When I pulled him aside and basically told him to pull his head out of his ass, or he would be out his ass, he smiled, pulled his phone out of his pocket and showed me a photo of an attractive young woman. He said, "You see her. Pretty, isn't she? Low morals. Would you like to meet her tonight?" Needless to say, security had him out the door before the tea on my desk got cold. Story 84. I was a supervisor at a teenage girls group home. I wasn't her direct supervisor, But the girl in our front office was known for disappearing for long lunches and coming back acting out of sorts. One day she left, took a 3-hour lunch, and came back, eyes bloodshot, pants slipping off, and carrying a bag of Del Taco. She sat down, proceeded to pull out a double cheeseburger, 2 tacos, a large burrito, and chili cheese fries, and ate it all in a matter of minutes. It didn't help that she would take breaks outside with our girls, who were struggling with substance abuse, and brag about smoking and drinking while at work. She only lasted 2 weeks. Story 85, I managed a retail store. After a long sit-down talk and him signing a formal write-up, we made a little small talk to lighten the mood, and I asked him to go back out on the floor and help the lady at the sales counter. He turned and looked, then said, "It's okay, it's just a ducker." I fired him on the spot and escorted him out the back door. About a month later, I had to attend an unemployment hearing when the guy actually had the guts to file a claim. He even brought his parents with him. Story 86, military guy here. Although we can't get fired in the normal sense, we can get fired from a position of authority or responsibility. While I was the head of the Quality Assurance Division for an F-18 squadron, my safety coordinator emptied out all of the water out of the eye wash stations without refilling them. Of course, nobody found out until one of them needed to be used. His excuse: well, the water was old. Our chief was so mad he turned purple, white guy purple. Our safety coordinator was quickly reassigned to plain wash petty officer. The chiefs made up a position just for him that was ingeniously terrible. Story 87. It guy catches ID 10T surfing adult film at work, warns him that it is against the rules, and if the boss finds out they will fire him, to stop doing that at work, etc. Basically, It guy was doing him a solid by warning him that it was monitored and in the logs, etc. ID 10T goes to boss and complains about it. Guy telling him not to watch adult film at work. Story 88. Installing Skype on a workstation in a high-security lab. Cell phones were not allowed for the same reason. Worst part was I failed the dude in training for another company a few months back when he was brought into the conference room. He just looked at me and said, "Oh no, not you, not again." Story 89. Adult film. You work for a federal agency, everything you do on a computer is watched. Why are you looking? We even gave him 3 strikes. He was 3 years from being able to retire. Story 90. I worked with a guy at Microsoft who took advantage of the employee's software purchase plan and was buying Xbox games on the cheap and returning them to various stores throughout the area. He was complaining one day that some stores had cut him off from returns. That news wasn't taken lightly, and his boss was informed. They fired him that day, the day before Christmas. Dude threw away the best job he'll ever have for a couple of grand and had to go home to his wife and kids and explain his loser self on Christmas Eve. Story 91. I once fired a driver for coming into my office every morning in his underwear to offer me donuts. His name was Ken, and he was an idiot. When the shop guys were cleaning out his truck, they found syringes and a spoon from where he had been shooting dope up on the road. So glad I don't have to dispatch anymore. That guy was totally crazy. Story 92. I worked for a railroad at the time, and I had to fire a crew for blowing their horn to the tune of "Mary Had a Little Lamb in a Quiet Zone" at 2 a.m. in the morning. Story 93. My dad had to fire someone because, at the height of the anthrax scare, they decided that it would be hilarious to sprinkle flour all over the coffee machine. Story 94. I used to manage service stations in Australia. Fired a staff member. After I came into work early one morning, it was not a 24-hour site, and there he was taking money from the safe. There are cameras in the office pointed at the safe. He also used his personal passcode to get into the office, which was logged. He was taking the money to go to the casino to make more money. Guaranteed. Am I right? He was totally going to put it back. I could not get over how ducking stupid he was about it all. Story 95. I work at Home Depot. When I got hired, they were going over safety rules and whatnot. One of the rules is not to stand on the forklift. No crap, right? Apparently a previous associate needed to pull something off the shelf, so he put a pallet on the forklift, stood on it, and had the customer raise him 20 feet in the air. Fired on the spot. You can't make this crap up. Story 96. First day of new job, newbie told to sit in the lounge and read through the staff handbook. While doing this, he updated his Facebook status to, "I hate my new job." I commented, "Come into my office." It went downhill from there. Top tip. Don't add you boss on Facebook. Story 97. Working in medical records. One of my staff was listening to some podcasts, YouTube, whatever, while he was working. He copy and pasted something he wanted to find, and then copied and pasted that exact phrase into the chart, which couldn't be removed. Howard Stern, adult stars. Not something you want an employee who works alone at night to enter. Also, it was working for a contract company, up for contract reevaluation for arguably one of the biggest contracts in the US. Story 98. Friend of mine is a firefighter, and his colleague got fired for making special cookies and feeding them to his workmates on shift without telling them about the extra fiber he added. They actually had to attend a house fire that night and were super paranoid that they hadn't put it out properly. Lots of water was wasted that evening. Story 99. Back in my retail days, I got a picture message from an employee on my day off. It was a picture of another employee asleep on my desk. I was looking for a solid reason to fire him anyway. He was an idiot. Story 100. We had an employee who carefully crafted an email to a friend disparaging the company and his opinion of the poor prospects for the company stock. He then messed up and sent it to the entire company, including the CEO, the board of directors, and the chairman of the board. This turned out to be what we now call a KLM, or career limiting move. Managers of Reddit. What's something you found on someone's computer that made you say, TF? This Indian guy had just left our company. He was extremely conservative, no bullcrap, no joking around kind of guy, small, glasses, and always dressed in button-ups and khakis. He was pretty high up too, just below director level. Anyway, he left to start his own company and turned his laptop in. You'd think someone working at a technology company would know to use incognito for any naughty stuff they looked at on their work computer, or at least clear browser history. Nope. Every second this guy wasn't looking at email or PowerPoints. Big black butts. Constantly browsing for big butts during work, and that's like all he'd do after work. I don't mean he'd go home and look at big butts for 20 minutes in pleasure. Every day 6+ hours of looking at big black butts when he got home. Story 2. I was working on some stuff for the local parish church years ago, and the latest search on the priest's computer was consensual adult spanking. You know, I didn't care if he was into spanking, but I had to that he went to the trouble of finding adults who consented. Story 3. A guy brought in a laptop with a failing hard drive for data recovery. Part of our service agreement includes the fact that we open some random files to make sure that the data recovery actually worked, and we made that clear to every client. He was fine with it. Well, we open it up the next day to gigabytes of adult film. We're talking well-defined sets from many photo shoots. Immediately called it into the cops and ended up breaking up a major adult film ring in Central Texas. Dude wasn't happy when we couldn't give his laptop back. Cops already had it, but he didn't know that. Come on, man. Story 4. Logged onto a roommate's computer to play Half-Life 2 and found a paused video still up entitled, 2 Pissin' on a Barbecue. I watched Story 5. For me, I always have, though adult film is a normal thing. But downloading 50 toolbars till you can barely see your screen or 20 different versions of the same Mahjong game makes me go, for sure. Story 6. A coworker of mine had his desktop wallpaper set to a selfie of him bawling his eyes out. I was so ducking confused. When I asked him about it, he said, "Everyone has pictures of themselves smiling. Why don't we have other emotions in selfies?" To which I responded, "Because of that," while pointing at his monitor. Story 7. I also once had a guy come to me to fix his tablet. He was a larger guy, in his 30s, with a bare-threaded cat t-shirt. He reeked of both cat and human piss. "I have something wrong with my photo folder," he said, and whipped the tablet towards me. He began slowly scrolling through each photo, with a subdued smile slowly spreading across his face. Each photo was of him, completely nude. Some were close-ups of his genitals. "Does this make you feel funny?" he said. "I've seen a lot of crap working in it. So no, but there's nothing wrong with your folder. Have a good day," I said. And with that, I walked off. To be honest, though, it gave me the heebie-jeebies. I still sort of wonder if I should have reported him for it. Seems like the digital version of flashing. Story 8. Used to work for a place that did its stuff for schools, mainly parochial schools. One of the guys that had to have viruses removed more often than anybody. Every virus came from adult sites, and he'd pretty regularly download literal gigabytes of adult film every week. And this was about 6 years ago. So that is a lot more video than what it would be today, due to video quality increases over time. We were out to clean up his computer about once a week, and the school church was getting charged every time. Main reason that we figured out it was from adult film was because the school church asked us to look into why he was getting viruses so often. We normally don't look into what they're actually doing unless we're asked to. Browser history was all we ended up needing. Story 9. I found a folder on a friend's computer with gruesome experiments. She seemed nice and cute. Turns out she had some weird fetishes, but at least we became closer at that point because I was the only one that knew. Story 10. A female teacher at a middle school got caught up in a bit of a mess by using her personal iCloud account on a school-issued iPad. You can probably see where this is going. She took a series of nude selfies on her personal iPhone, and they got automatically uploaded to her school iPad. Well, one day, the principal of the school grabbed her iPad in a conference room to use it for something and found the pictures. The creepy part of this story is that the principal called me to his office and asked me to retrieve the evidence from the iPad and store it to a thumb drive and deliver it to him. I didn't feel this was appropriate at all, so I let my boss know. He felt the same way and decided to handle the situation. The principal was a 60-something married man, my boss was a middle-aged, openly gay man, and in general, just a really nice guy. He realized that it was just a mistake on the teacher's part and helped her to see degree. The teacher ended up leaving on her own, and the principal apparently wrote her a glowing letter of recommendation. I guess the info about the principal wanting personal copies of the teacher's pictures got out somehow. Story 11. Not technically a guy, but copier technician. Not found on computer, but in a copier. Customer called up caring about how your stupid copier always jams and doesn't work, and it's all your fault, blah blah. The copier hadn't had a single service call place in over 13 months, mind you. I get on site and to the copier. Customer contact is standing over my shoulder, huffing and puffing, just being an insufferable Karen in general. I get the jam to occur and discover that a massive monster of a booger has dried up in the paper path. It was solid enough to prevent paper from passing through. I enjoyed getting to tell her why her copier was jamming. Story 12 was trying to locate something on a mate's laptop, looking through his folders, and found a video of a guy staring at a camera and crying for 10 minutes. He was the weird kind of meme guy. And he got so worried when I opened it up, he showed me that his brother was helping him make it for a project. It was a featured project at school, so I guess it's not that bad. Story 13. I work at a college department. I didn't see it, but my coworker did. An old guy shows up asking to help send a picture of his id to his email. I see my coworker start working with him, then immediately set the phone down and walk off as the old guy hastily grab his phone and stand around awkwardly, not talking or answering any questions when I ask him if everything is all right. Coworker messages me from his phone saying, "Tell him when the old guy leaves." Old guy stands around for 5 minutes and then leaves. Apparently, my coworker accidentally swiped to the next photo, and it was this old dude's wrinkly junk wrapped up in multiple purple rubber bands. He's coming back from a year abroad this next week, and his workstation is going to be covered with purple rubber bands. Story 14. This isn't quite what you meant, but we had a guy in accounting who had his disk drive permanently open. He would use it to hold his coffee cup or bagels, and always referred to it as the cup holder. Story 15. Back in the days of AOL chat rooms, I was talking to this girl. Met her a few times, we went to a party, and that was about it. She was really pretty, but I can tell she wasn't into me. Fast forward like 10 years, I'm fixing a computer for this dentist at his office. I'm backing up some stuff, including his pictures folder. I was quite surprised to see the pic of that girl that she sent me 10 years earlier. I guess Doc was an AOL playa back in the day too. Story 16. Not it, but had an old boss, and I'm still technically a millennial. Big titty and permutations thereof all over his search history. Folders of videos I did not open. After that, I stopped touching other people's computers, even when they asked. Story 17. I found pictures of naked, muscular men in a used computer my parents bought for us. I was shocked because I'd never seen a naked man before, so I drew pants and sweaters for them in Miss Paint Story 18. I worked it for a major airline for several years. My best example was the time our VP of Finance brought his laptop down because it was impossibly slow and forgot to delete all of his adult film. I watched him get escorted out of the building in handcuffs. Story 19. I work it. One time, a few jobs back, my manager, Ithead, was the absolute worst for getting malware. His machine had to be scrubbed every quarter. We had a conversation one time about how he was impressed by all of the music and movies he could for pennies from a website. Website turns out to be Russian-based. A few days after our conversation, the site is replaced with an FBI warning page saying the site was criminal. Story 20. Call customer, remote into PC, open Windows Explorer, and C drive titled Adult Film. I don't know if he knew I saw it. He at least didn't react. We agreed to reschedule though. Why a whole drive though? Story 21. Years ago, I used to do long software installs at my company. For the particularly long installs, I would just RDC into their machines so they wouldn't start trying to work or anything. During a 45-minute install, I'd get bored and look around. The first time I found an adult film folder on a work machine, I was dumbfounded. Why on a machine that your company owns? Keep it at home. On one install, I noticed there was a USB plugged in and found that was completely full or adult film. That at least made a bit more sense, but I still wouldn't bring that to the office. Aside from adult film, the biggest WTF is IE6. Story 22. I worked it years ago. I still do some stuff occasionally to help out family and friends in a bind, mostly hard drive recovery stuff. At this point, it's pretty much expected that there will be some kind of weird, questionable folder that I just leave the contents of alone. Nudes? Yep. Self-made adult film, photos and videos? Yep. Giant caches of adult film? Yes, sir. It's all pretty standard stuff in this day and age. I basically treat it like an attorney-client privilege, though. I usually provide them with an ample warning beforehand. This software can recover a lot of stuff, even stuff that you deleted long ago. Typically, their face gives it away that there's going to be something on there. I haven't encountered anything illegal, thankfully. The funniest thing I ever encountered, though, was a girl who needed her cell phone recovered. I asked her 3 separate times about the potential content of her phone. She said there was absolutely nothing on there. Only there was. All her. All nude. A lot of different angles, views, perspectives, photos, videos, the works. I think she realized after she left because when she came back, she was beet red and wouldn't look up from the floor. Story 23. This guy came up to me saying his computer kept shutting down. After taking a look at it, I noticed the entire back of the case was just covered in candle wax. And not like regular wax. This crap was like gooey, lotiony candle wax. Dude liked to light candles and set them on top of his case. That was a Karen and a half to clean. Story 24. Had a coworker bring in her husband's computer because it was shutting off all the time. There was huge amounts of substances in all the air vents. He would roll and watch adult film at his desk. He had been doing it for years. I think the street value of that compact was probably enough to pay for a new computer. Story 25. All right, this is a very innocent one, but it still makes me wonder what the duck was wrong with this woman who was literally here for a presentation to teach Chromebook skills. She wasn't the first presenter, so this wasn't stage fright. She was just sitting in the audience when this happened. 50-years-old computer-savvy user on a Chromebook starts complaining loudly that her enter key is not working. Naturally, every other person with an ounce of technical savvy is ignoring her because she was part of the group that came today to teach them, 50YO, how to use the Chromebooks they're all on, including the IT guy from her program, who she brought and who works with her, and definitely knew what was up. I mean, she says the key is broken, so it must be, right? She's one of the experts here, and it's not her IT guy's job to repair our devices, right? So I walk up, ask her to demonstrate the problem. She starts typing in the search bar without ever looking at the keyboard, and then finishes and says, "Look, it didn't search." No, duh. That's what happens when you press shift instead of enter. Story 26. Found some adult film on a client's computer at my first EAT job while doing a virus removal. Police called, dude arrested. This was like 8 years ago. I was working for an MSP and we had probably 200 clients, mostly small businesses, dentists, doctors' offices, car repair shops, things like that. I was the go-to for difficult virus removals that we couldn't just do a wipe and reload on. And there was a virus spreading across their network. I think the ticket came in late Friday and most of their staff had already gone home. But the client's owner called it in and they were a big one for us. So my boss sent me over to try and get it handled before the next business week. I started with the boss's computer, found the infection and traced it back to the offending computer over a period of a couple hours, as a couple of the registry entries the virus was placing referenced a program that was only on 3 or 4 of their computers. I think they had around 25, 30 all told, not including their servers. Anyhow, the boss wanted to know specifics, since he was paying after hours premiums for this. So after finding the computer, I made an image which I could take back to the office where I had some standalone, off-network, no internet, etc., virtual environments I could load it into that I used specifically for these type of situations. The guy had like 800 GB of junk files and whatnot. And eventually I found a couple of pics of women. At first I thought it might have been his GFWash wife, whatever, but I kept getting pointed back to these file types. I don't recall what they were, but not .jpeg or common pic file formats. The issue here was that I couldn't just go straight to the offending files to see them, because the file names were so long that they were cut off and unsearchable. So I had to manually find all the files as the first string, and there were thousands, and then scan them. The reason I couldn't just say, hey, this is all bad, is because oftentimes a virus will change the names, or really anything it is able to change. So there was a chance that it was just one offending file that ducked up the whole system. Nope, not in this case. So you open up a file and press right arrow to scroll to the next one. After about 300 nonsense business files, more pictures of ladies started showing up. I walk him through everything, show him the couple pics I found, and we call the 5 no cops get there. I give a statement and detailed process for what went down. See above, but had more IT jargon, programs used, timestamps, etc. They take my image and watch as I remove it from my VM systems. I went with them to the client's office to point out the guy's computer, and that's the last I was directly involved. I heard later from my boss what they found and that the guy was in jail waiting for a jury, if I recall correctly. Story 27. Not quite found, but people who are not too comfortable with computers often take hacking or virus and write off all bugs, crashes, unexpected behavior, you name it, to being the result of them being hacked or them having a virus. Not just computers on phones and smart TVs and the likes as well. Story 28. Cell phone tech here. And I got 3 stories for y'all. One time an older lady came on freaking out. Turns out She tried to send a picture of her pussy to a guy in Messenger and accidentally posted it on her Facebook timeline instead. One of the sales reps at the store I work at described it as looking like somebody dropped Arby's into dusty cobwebs. The fiancé of a woman I graduated college with came in with nudes of someone that definitely wasn't her. Recently, I was helping a guy restore his device from his iCloud backup, and I was showing him where pictures were coming through and loading from the cloud when a picture of his girlfriend's ass pops up while we're both looking at his phone, and she's sitting there just far enough off to the side that she can't see the screen. I exit out of his photos and he starts laughing while his girlfriend is completely oblivious. I don't want to assume too much, but the guy seems like the type to tell her once he got home just to embarrass her. Story 29. Don't work in it, but at our work we get a monthly naughty list. Everyone who has software they aren't allowed on their work laptops or PCs were on this list. Not quite WTF, but a few people had Minecraft and World of War installed on their computers. I inherited a PC, so I was on that list. But for Adobe, apparently I was using the wrong version. Story 30. One of my guys was remotely working on a PC. He left the remote connection active for a few minutes while he was researching something. Sure enough, some dude logs in and starts looking in his pictures directory, and there were tons and tons of pictures of women. We're not prudes or anything, but the computer we were working on is a 24/7 man station that requires people to monitor surveillance cameras, buzz people in, etc. When he got fired, he said, "My job gets boring." The funny part was, he tried to file for unemployment, and HR asked me for help to build the case, so I had to copy all the feet pictures onto a flash drive for them. Story 31. I was migrating data on a work computer, and it was taking way longer than it should. I noticed a folder called Delete on the desktop, so I of course opened it. It had hundreds of photos, so I started opening them. I felt bad because we had just met his wife. My coworker reminded me someone had to be taking the pictures. Story 32. I uncovered a murder, reported to the FBI a few years ago, but I don't know if there was any outcome. I was at a garage sale that was more like an estate sale. The owner of the house was a former sheriff who had suddenly abandoned the house and moved to Florida, leaving the house and everything in it to be sold by his realtor. I walked through and it was a fairly normal old person's house, with the exception of 2 giant safes and several smaller ones in the basement. I'm a pretty awful person, so the only things I bought were a laptop bag that I noticed had about $15 worth of coins in it and a stack of about 20 floppy disks out of curiosity about what was on them. When I got home, I put in the disks and one by one copied them to my computer. The only things were a bunch of text documents dated mid-90s, each one a letter. Not an email, an actual letter with a name and address to be printed out and mailed, and a handful of adult images. As I read through the letters, I discovered they were to various men this sheriff had found in places like the personal section of magazine. They mostly talked about his interests, occasionally looking for an in-person hookup. He was really into both dirty socks. No kink shaming, but one of those 2 things is important to my story. After about half an hour of violating this man's most personal effects, some patterns emerged. To most men, he had specifically spelled out that he had no interest in actually harming anyone. To about 5 men, however, he described that he was looking for someone who wanted to be lost. He pointed out that as a sheriff, he knew how to arrange it to look like a death. Keep in mind, I only have sent mail, nothing he got back, so I had to guess at responses. At that point, I went back and sorted the letters by recipient and date. After picking the most interesting, I started Googling. Not sure how to draw this out and make it more interesting, but I have to go. So to get to the point, at least 2 of the men who had received some of the darkest letters I found had died by own death within a year of correspondence. I was actually hesitant to report it, because to each his own, I guess. But I was worried that some of his more innocent correspondence could have been fishing for unwilling victims, along with the power he'd had as a sheriff. Story 33. Worked for the Genius Bar for a good while. Here are some of my top stories from computers and phones. 1. Customer brought his MacBook in for a hardware repair, and part of the diagnosis process required us to run a program from his desktop. On his desktop, however, was quite a bit of adult film. He was reported to the police and eventually arrested. Apparently, those were his personal recordings. 2. Opened up a 2010 Mac Pro, and roaches scurried out, enough to infest our whole location, to the point that we had to hire an exterminator. 3. Phone user was having issues with Safari, so I asked him to repeat the steps he had taken before in order to recreate the issue and rule out user error. He opened up his browser, and his most recent search of adult film was still open. He slowly looked up at me until we made eye contact, and then he scurried away faster than the roaches. 4. Older lady wanted help editing a video on her iMac. The video was up footage of her giving birth, and she had no shame displaying it to us and the entire store. Guy was having issue with iCloud when it first came out. Specifically, His photos weren't transferring between his devices. He had his iPad and iPhone for comparison purposes. Sure enough, there were no photos on his iPad. His phone, however, contained a burst mode series of photos of him mid-duck. I know it was him because from the angle, I could see both of his heads. He did not appear to have any issue with me seeing this series of photos, though. I have plenty more NSFW stories, but these are some of the more WTF ones. Story 34. A customer of the place where I had an internship had a virus on his PC. The virus deleted everything that got installed after it. It was named Not a Virus. Story 30. I used to have a local PC support business. I got called for an on-site visit to work on a PC for a new customer. No big deal. So I show up and it's a basement apartment decked out with a shag carpet, 70s accoutrement. Basically, this place never moved forward from 77 or so. Now keep in mind, this was the early 2000s. The owner was a fairly doughy, nondescript older guy who was definitely on the awkward side, but no flags went up other than the questionable taste and decor. He proceeded to explain what needed done on his PC, from what I recall, pretty standard malware cleaning due to music file sharing and no AV. Anywho, he then asked about a separate PC he has set up and explained that it's not on the internet, but he'd like to have AV and anti-malware on it. I explained to him that those tools wouldn't be as effective and asked why he wasn't connecting it to the internet, figuring I'd have to help him sideload updates because he's using it for games or something and doesn't want to have any patching, etc. He was a bit cagey, but eventually got around to logging in and showing me a bunch of what looked like JCPenney catalog photos, all while repeatedly telling me there's nothing weird or illegal. I was around my mid-20s and still fairly new to the game and had no ducking clue what to do about all of this craziness. I immediately wrapped that crap up, gave some vague I don't really know answers, and noped the duck out. Of course, after talking it over with my parents, it was pretty freaking obvious the dude was a big pedo, but he probably was right in that it wasn't illegal, so we just flagged him as a customer to push off and not do any more work for. I did receive a call or two over the years from a number asking legal advice, namely, if I bring my PC in for service and you find stuff, is it illegal and do you have to report it? I assume it was him, and my answer was always, I'm not a lawyer, but if I see anything I even think is illegal, I'm stopping and calling the cops. Never had a service request from him moving forward in 15 years. Still creeps me out to this day, and I know at the time I don't think there was anything I could have done, probably, but can't imagine that guy didn't eventually do something. Story 36. Once I found a video in my current boyfriend's recent internet history. I didn't go any further, but haven't seen anything similar since, so hope it was once of those, what the hell is that? I'm totally gonna watch it, finds on his part, rather than something he's actually into. Story 37. So there was a motivational speaker that would bring his computer in. For the life of me, I can't remember his name. He was a very arrogant git of a man. He was a Christian speaker and was very popular in the local area. This was Waynesville, NC. He would bring his laptop in from time to time for repair. It was always adult film and malware. He left it on the screen when he brought it in. You would open the system and boom, a browser would come up with some nasty video on it. Always something awful. At first, I thought he might have been doing it on purpose to get a reaction out of us. After all, he was a very crude ass of a person. He always made inappropriate comments to the ladies at the front desk. However, over the years he would bring it in, I came to the conclusion that he was just so addicted to his habits that just having to bring it in was triggering him to withdrawal. The worst time was he was heading to vacation, brought his system in and dropped it off. I was on a conference call in the back and didn't take the system in. When I got off the phone, I went up to the front to see if I could help. I was team lead, so anything new coming in was usually run by me. The woman at the front's face was white as a sheet. She was a lesbian. You will see why this is relevant in a second, and her hands were shaking. I asked her what was wrong. Open that creepy ducker's laptop, but don't do it without gloves. I put on rubber gloves, yes, sadly, we kept them handy in the back, and pried open the laptop. A massive amount of dried semen was on the keyboard. This waste of oxygen had cracked one off on his keyboard and not bothered to clean it off before bringing it to us to clean the malware off from him browsing foul recesses of the internet to get his fix. Yeah, I cleaned the creepiest thing off of a laptop. That's the worst thing I've found on someone's computer. Ugh, I need a shower. Story 38. Used to work at a local mom-and-pop computer repair shop for an internship back when I just started out. Most customers were old folks or, because of the nearby social workplace, somewhat slower than usual people. One day, this guy comes in and says his computer ain't working. Sure, set it down. We'll check it and call him if we got a diagnosis. I boot up the PC and it isn't broken, just very slow. Okay, let's clean it up. Still slow after CCleaner and a virus scan, so it ain't that. I checked the hard disk and it was completely fragmented and never saw that before. I call my boss over and he says to back up personal files and just reinstall. Sure, so I start looking around on his computer to back up the personal files and such, and I come across a folder called Stories. I ain't supposed to peek around, but my curiosity got the best of me, and I opened the folder. There were hundreds and hundreds of Word files, all called something like dude's name and generic female name. Since I was already there, I opened one just to check it out, and it was the most graphic yet generic dirty story about him meeting a random woman. It basically read like a visual description of adult film, wasn't really well written. Then I checked another, and it was exactly the same story, but with a different female name, and the third one just like that. I scrolled a bit down and checked another one, and this was a different, but another generic story with himself as the lead. The stories surrounding were again like the same Mad Libs, but with just female name. Eventually, I figured out that this guy wrote a story and then copied it with different female names at least 20 times. Double file names got a title change to The Sequel. As a real professional, I didn't mention it to my boss or to the guy himself. I backed up everything, reinstalled, and put everything back. The guy paid and left. Still wonder what he was trying to accomplish. Story 39. It's usually adult film. Once in a while, illegal. There was a guy that got let go, and the cops called because of it. Do the math on what kind. We immediately bag and tag the PC for forensics. Story 40. Got a trouble ticket for a workstation that keep rebooting. Go check it and find the workstation in a locker, like a gym locker. Kinda odd, but a good use of space. Go to open the locker, and the guy says, "Careful, that locker shocks you sometimes." I laugh. Open locker, see sparks fly from the hinges, and notice the power cord is pulled through there and is completely frayed with exposed copper. I laugh more, flip the breaker, and take the computer. The computer was fine, just the cord was jacked. But he didn't get the computer back for a few weeks because we were still fixing it. Story 41. I was setting up my married grandpa's new printer and found a folder with 200 gigabytes of adult film right on his desktop. One video in its own folder was called Golf Ball Washer. You know what was there? Story 42. I work on computers like I'm in a nudist colony only making eye contact. I will not fill out that form or go to meetings because I saw something gross. I will not have to make eye contact with someone knowing what their kink is. Before roaming profiles, my coworker worked on his erotic novel on our shared computer. It was mediocre. 2. Mom told me she replies to spam mail asking them to take her off their mailing list. Story 43. Working as an on-call I once visited a guy who had a carefully sorted folder of adult film. I was around 20 at the time, and I was also searching internet for all sorts of weird crap, and I was like, yo, this guy knows his stuff. But it's not the adult film part that was weird. What was weird that he had it literally on his desktop in a folder named Adult Film. He obviously wanted to speak to someone about it. At the time, I was a rather welcoming person, so I checked that folder right in front of him, said something like, "Damn, that's a lot of material," and he went off. He was talking non-stop about his kink while I was sorting his stuff out. He had no viruses, literally none. He just had driver issues and a dead Wi-Fi on his laptop. He talked so much about it, he even insisted on showing me some of the best videos. Story 44. In my late teens, early 20s, I was going through a wee bit of hypochondria and was just certain that I had brain cancer and was going to die any second. I wrote a goodbye letter and left it on my desktop labeled as something like, "Read this," so that my surviving family members wouldn't miss it. I can't remember the exact details, but I essentially wrote something to each of my friends and family members, and I do remember specifically saying something along the lines of, "If you find the adult film, don't mind it. Oh, and by the way, surprise, I'm gay." A family member came over one day and we were playing video games, and I must have gotten tired and fell asleep. I woke up and found them on my computer, having guessed the password. It was my birthday. He said, "So you are going to hit yourself?" Oh, I thought. I told him that it was just a college project. Not sure how I came up with that one so quickly. And we went back to playing video games and everything seemed fine. Until I got a call from his mom later that night asking about the letter. She said that a school wouldn't have a project like that, but I assured her it did. After a while, she seemed to let it go. So that's a twofer. Something found on my computer that made them say WTF in my coming out story. Story 45. Norton Antivirus. Yahoo set as default search engine. Only 512 MB of RAM on the boss's main laptop. I asked him to let me build him new computers. I did, or for free out of pity. Story 46. Not as weird as some of the stuff here, but I still said WTF. I worked for a company that had several new car franchises. It was a privately held company, so many times I would end up fixing personal computers for the owners or setting up their home Wi-Fi, stuff like that. One of the daughters of the owner was really, really attractive. Her husband was a good guy, but never really struck me as a bright guy. Just a guy that lucked out and hooked up with the owner's daughter, so he was on easy street. Nice house, free cars, gas, insurance, lots of trips, etc., etc. One day he asked me to look at his laptop because it wasn't running well, and I found that he was a big-time fan of Site, which is a website set up to help people cheat on their spouse, either knowingly or unknowingly. I was pretty much blown away because he had a beautiful wife and an awesome life. Was definitely a WTF moment for a young it guy who thought this guy had the life. I suppose it is possible they were into that sort of thing as a couple, but I highly doubt it. I never said a word to anyone. I just cleaned up the laptop and gave it back to him. Story 47. I'm never bringing my computer in for repair, never. Between my photos and videos being in a million different folders, it's impossible to avoid, and I wouldn't be able to look you in the eye. Not to mention what happens when you even just open a browser. No, thank you. Story 48. Cleaning up a person's work PC, they had downloaded and installed real-time video player, tons of browser bars, lots of these weird PC fixer programs like driver repair or cleanup ones, an antivirus that was actually just a virus. I downloaded ran MWBAV and Rootkit Beta, Hitman Pro, Rkill, and cleaned up the PC, but it had like 5 Trojan viruses, tons of pups, and a few other lesser viruses. Uninstalled all the crap from the machine, then switched it over to safe mode to run some more checks. Everything came back clean. Advised her not to install anything she was unsure of, and if she was unsure of something to contact us before doing anything. The whole ordeal took about an hour of my time and some extra time after she left for the day. Called back the next day, she had installed more crap on her PC, and it was slow again. Cleaned up again, and made a recommendation to pull any local administrative rights from her PC, so this doesn't just keep repeating. I seriously have no idea how someone can install real-time player anymore. That was a thing in like the 2000s, but I don't know anyone who actually uses that anymore. Story 49. I was helping a friend and offered to remote into her computer to do something. She didn't have the folder open I needed, so I tried to go to it, but due to lag, I misclicked and went to some other folder that was on this last accessed list in Windows. It were hundreds of pictures of her butt. Just it. And her face body, obviously, but the butt in the focus. Nothing else. I just laughed, and she was pretty cool with it as well. When I went to sleep that night, I dreamed about her having her butt as eyes. And when we met a few weeks after that, I couldn't look at her without getting the image of her butt in my head. Story 50. I think my favorite would be updating a computer in a home office, and I find links and history to some adult film. The lady owner's a little concerned as she doesn't look at that stuff and begins to wonder if her daughters have been discovering stuff. She lets them use her office computer against my advice as they have their own, which is filtered. She asked me to look into it a little more and see what dates, times, certain sites were accessed. While I was checking, her husband came in and chatted with me, which he often did. I told him what I was doing and what I found, and he went all sheepish and started explaining to me about when a man gets a little lonely at night and starts looking around on the web, and that's where I stopped him, said, "It's not a problem," and cleared up anything I found. Explained to the wife how easy it was to type something innocuous into a search engine and end up on those sites, so her daughters may have come across it accidentally, and it's nothing to worry about. Story 51. Back when Harlem Shake videos were popular, I used a buddy's laptop. After I put Harlem in the search bar, a previously searched term, Harlem Struggle, shows up. Don't Google the Harlem Struggle. Story 52. Not really it, but I used to work at an Apple store as a mobile technician. I was working on some guy's cell phone, and when he unlocked it for me so I could navigate the home screen, I thought the background picture looked kind of odd. It was blurry and kind of looked like skin. The closer I looked, I realized he had taken a picture of a woman's pussy zoomed up close. It was extremely disturbing, and to this day, I struggle to block the image out. Standing so close to him after that was very uncomfortable. Why would he so nonchalantly have that as his background? Why? Story 53. I work in it now, but the most WF things I've seen on laptops came from my time working in a pawn shop. I've had people bring in laptops with naked pics of themselves or others as their desktop background. But the craziest thing was the day a seemingly normal dude came in to pawn his laptop. We checked them out pretty thoroughly, usually, but we would never go into people's private stuff. Except this one day. I had written his loan and was about to shut it down to be bagged and put in the back when my manager comes up and said, "That was a weird dude," then sees on his desktop a file titled XS Small and another Showtime. He clicked, and it was a mass collection of adult film. We called the cops. He went to prison. Story 54. I was helping a woman access her recently deceased husband's computer. She had no idea what anything was because he was the tech guy in the family. In a folder, I found a download Bitcoin wallet and a text file, noting that he had purchased a substantial number of Bitcoin, purchased back when it was dirt cheap. I asked her if she had any children who were good with computers. "Yes, my grandson." "Do you trust him?" "Absolutely." "Good. Tell him you have a Bitcoin wallet and you want him to see if there's anything in it. This could dramatically affect your financial future, and you don't want some random tech guy messing with it." Sadly, I don't have a follow-up, but I'd like to believe she's now rich. Story 55. Not it, but I once worked a college sports camp and was asked to film the night games with the assistant coach's computer as the capture device. I was messing around on Google and looked at his history, a bunch of adult sites. A lot of things clicked and made sense after that discovery. He is a head coach at a major D1 program, so I keep in touch with him. He is a good contact. Real good dude. Story 56. I used to work at a depot repair type place, fixing like 10, 20 laptops a day. Helped cover for the desktop team when someone called out. Had a repair come in, paperwork said swap PSU, boot, test. Opened the case, and every single square inch of the inside, parts and all, had Arabic written in permanent marker. It's not really that WTF, but made me pause for a minute because after hundreds of laptops, desktops, and being used to seeing bare metal and the usual crap, it threw me off. Dude in our office said it was a line repeated over and over, probably to let the customer know if we took anything out of their computer, they'd see the script missing and know we took something. Story 57. At work on a company-owned PC. I was going around finishing up some office upgrades that failed via scam, saw a flash drive sticking out that looked like the ones issued to my team. Personal external drives are not allowed. I viewed the files on it to see if I could identify which of our guys left it. Turns out, it wasn't ours. It was the guy that works at that desk. It was pictures and videos of his wife, BJ. I can't imagine he left that there knowingly. Story 58. I worked it for a law firm. The CIO had me do some work on the main system. I found that an employee was quietly stealing, saving client files, and was naming the downloads different dirty-sounding names to cover his tracks. Story 59. Been working at a Mac repair shop for almost 2 years now. Apart from your everyday stuff like nudes of your girlfriend, I once found pictures of a client's very attractive wife, sprawled out on the bed on all fours. Only reason it made me WTF is that the folder was one click away in the root directory, on a computer that you just gave us to clean up. Needless to say, it was a little awkward when they came back in to pick it up. Story 60. While on a service trip, one of the workers, who everyone suspected was gay, gave me his laptop so I could help him with the Wi-Fi. A Facebook group chat named Bunch had a notification pop up that read, "Who's ready for tonight? What's a dirty secret about your workplace that people shouldn't be knowing?" Story 1. I work in a plastic bag plant. Everything in here runs on electricity. The owners tapped into a power line that runs through the property, and for more than 10 years, they didn't pay a dime. They made tens of millions. When the fraud was found out, they blamed an employee who was from Latin America and were given a $200K fine. You can't find the story online anymore. They used their community connections to have it erased and flat out deny it ever happened. Who says crime doesn't pay? Story 2. I'm a handyman. Contractors' favorite saying is, "Can't see it from my house." You ever see those videos from home inspectors pointing out all the crooked or broken crap in brand new construction? It's because the builders don't ducking care. And then once all the cracks start forming in your walls, they go, "Oh, that's just the house settling." Nope, they built it crafty in the first place, and now their shoddy work is shining through. Story 3. No longer employed there. But when I worked at a certain big box retailer of home improvement products, we would occasionally see hopeful strangers sitting in our lobby with boxes or other packaging, waiting for meetings. These people were small-time inventors of new products and were trying to get them on the shelves of our retail location. What they didn't know is that, as condition for consideration of carrying the product, they would be required to turn one or more samples over to the company to be examined by the product teams. If the product showed promise, one of those samples would be shipped to another country where it would be thoroughly dissected and analyzed so that an equivalent product could be developed under the house label, with enough modifications to not infringe on any patents, of course. And that product was what would end up on the shelf. From what I heard, a lawsuit pretty much ended the practice, and now they don't allow pitches from independent producers anymore. They just wait to see what other retailers are already carrying and selling well, and copy those. Story 4. My company will hire you solely based on physical attraction. My boss has told me that he feels if there are young, attractive females in the office, more employees will want to come in because they'll want to flirt talk with these girls. Story 5. I work in a grocery store. We don't clean the lids of the yogurt or sour cream tubs if the lid falls off. We just put it back on the product. It can fall on the floor in a puddle of milk, doesn't matter. At most, we might wipe it off on our apron or with a paper towel if available. Bulk produce items do fall on the floor regularly. We just pick them up and put them back on the shelf if it isn't damaged. If a container of berries or tomatoes pops open, we'll just put them all back in and put it back on the shelf. Nothing is rinsed off first. Almost nothing is actually made in the bakery. Everything either comes in already made or in portioned pieces of dough they throw into the oven. The only thing they really do is decorate cakes, donuts, bread, and bagels. Even most of the cakes come in with icing already on them. They just add some extra decorations. All of the seafood comes in frozen and is kept frozen even though the sign says never frozen. In fact, the seafood people will grab bags of frozen shrimp off the shelf and put it in the display case. You are literally paying more for some thawed-out shrimp. Story 6. We're shipping dangerously corrosive chemicals across the country in tanks that have repeatedly failed safety inspection. Very few get pulled over, so it's cheaper for the company to pay the fines instead of repairing the tanks or buying brand new ones. And with all the slashes to funding, firings, and relaxation of environmental regulations, it's getting even easier to do so. Story 7. Work as a gardener, but specialize in invasive species remediation. It's ridiculously unregulated and underpaid for what is incredibly dangerous work. My main thing is H. mantagasianum, giant hogweed, and I've saw people treating it in shorts and a t-shirt. The sap is phototoxic and can cause third-degree burns in sunlight for up to 7 years. I would happily do the paperwork and additional licensing if it meant untrained and under-equipped people weren't risking life-changing injuries for a few $100. Story 8. I sang opera professionally for a long time. The amount of harassment and assault that is not only overlooked but excused is absolutely abhorrent. When Domingo was called out, I had a colleague who furiously defended him. Her argument was that he was always nice to her. Well, he must be a good dude then, if he was nice to one lady who was close to his age and was already an established artist. Our old general director didn't give two craps about most of the artists and would repeatedly hire one particular conductor who groped a colleague on stage. It's getting a little better, but it's far, far too slow.